Hi, welcome to the course. My name is Fuad, and this video series will help you understand your reading material, assessment, and health professions education. Now, I'll point out to you in this series what's important, what's not so important. So, let's go right to it. So, that is the concept of purpose and purpose driven assessment, and then he goes on to introduce two frameworks which we can use to think about the validity of our assessment. The first one is Kane's validity framework, the validity argument. Okay, this is new as well, even newer than the second framework, but we'll discuss this one first. And basically, it guides our thinking right from the moment of contact, where the candidate comes into contact with the assessment and the assessment system, the actual assessment itself, where the candidate comes into contact with the question, with the item, with the patient in the station, etc., etc. Okay, now there are four uh, inferences or broad categories of assumptions. As I mentioned, first is scoring. That's where like I said, the candidate comes into contact with the assessment, and we have to think whether the observed scores accurately reflect how well examinees performed on the assessment they experienced or otherwise. Okay, so they get a score either by writing something on the paper or by being observed by a rater or a standardized patient and get a number. Now, we have to ask ourselves, does that number represent the performance? If someone performs well, will he get a higher score? Someone performs not so well, will he get a lower score, or will they just get same score? If someone performs well, will that translate into a high score, or something happened and or will other observers not trained so that someone who are competent but they do not get a high score? So we start to think, okay, at the scoring stage or the scoring categories of assumption. And then when we get the number, can we generalize? That's the second category of assumptions, generalization. Okay, that we assume that the observed scores are unbiased, reliable reflection of examinees' universe scores. Let's say an assessment measuring problem solving. No, okay. So the scoring part, okay, the assumption was correct. So a good candidate, he gets high marks. He's a good problem solver for that particular question. So he gets high marks. Now, generalization asks us, or we should ask, can I generalize then that as a whole, generally, that candidate is a good problem solver? Or is he just a good problem solver for that particular question? Okay. Uh, he goes on to explain, give examples. And the third step, the third category is that, okay, you can generalize that he's a good problem solver as a whole, but will good problem solving that we are measuring, will that translate into a good problem solver during work later on in the hospital? That is the area of extrapolation, or that's the category of extrapolation. And we assume that observed scores are suitably predictive of performance that we really care about. Okay, and lastly, we ask ourselves, have we made good decisions based on the assessment that we have done. That we assume that the observed scores inform decisions suitably, that is, without introducing biases, and lead to suitable consequences for anyone affected by the assessment. Okay, so that's Kane's validity framework. He asks us to look at assessment in that four, from very specific to wider and wider categories of assumptions. Okay, and he goes on in page 22 to give examples based on the previous analogy, that the first stage, scoring performance, happened in the assessment, but it didn't make it into the score. The second stage, trivial particulars about the assessment procedures mattered in a way that they should not have. The extrapolation, assessment performance did not correspond to real-world attributes of interest, and at the decision stage, scores did not help make better decisions and or support better consequences. Now, what's more important is table 2.1, where he gives you an example, number one, of an interpretation and use statement. Now, this, if you look at page 21, in the first paragraph, where in Kane's validity framework, where he introduced the concept of Kane's validity framework, he also introduced the concept of an interpretation use argument, an IUA. Okay, or Kane calls it your validity argument, and he actually gives an example of an IUA in table 2.1 in page 22, starting from goals and what we intend to do to assess the attribute that we want, and the assumptions that we have underlying it, and that is put in more detail in page 23. All right, and this is organized according to Kane's validity framework: scoring, generalization, extrapolation, decisions. And for each group, for example, in scoring, he gives the assumptions. Each case checklist of history, physical examination maneuvers contain all items essential for safe and effective care and no non-essential items. Okay, for example, that's our assumption. And he gives the example considerations for each assumption, how we can think about, is this assumption true? How can I investigate this assumption? Okay, so if you ask me, is this document actually exist? Not in the Malaysian context, not that I know of. This, I am assuming that it exists in places where this concept is more advanced, but as I said earlier, this is becoming more and more frequently mentioned in the literature, and I suspect that it will soon come to our shores.